Raider Church, how we doing tonight? Great to see everybody. Man, we pray for Tech to beat TCU. We got more amens I think I've ever heard in this place, like since we started. But hey, pumped that you're here tonight. We are starting a new series called I Am Judas, and we're just gonna jump right into it. When I was growing up, like in middle school and high school, there was this group of guys that I ran with, and we got in a lot of trouble. Like on a regular basis, we were always looking for different things to do. I don't know why, but this group of guys, and some of you guys have been there, you know what I'm talking about. Like we were always looking for things to destroy and set on fire and vandalize. And like I remember we went to this one neighborhood, like this rich neighborhood, and we would turn, I don't want to give you any ideas, but we would turn over these dumpsters like all throughout the alley, and then we would sit and wait and watch for cars to pull out of their driveways and then not have anywhere they could go because the dumpsters were blocking their way out from their house. So we were just always looking for crazy things like this to do. So one of these times, one of the things that we got into like big time was throwing water balloons at cars, all right? Now, we thought this was hilarious, okay? And we did it all the time. And we had this sweet spot. Like there was this power plant off this one street, and there was a fence that blocked kind of your view or the driver's view from the street. And so we could literally step out from behind this fence and really just be right at the curb, and we would just nail cars with these water balloons, okay, as they were coming to drive by. So this one time, we're behind this fence. We're waiting, all right? We see this car coming, okay? And we know, oh my gosh, this is gonna be awesome. The window was down. So I step out, we all got our water balloons, but I step out, I mean like right up next to this car, like I got close to it, okay, it's coming flying down the street, and I throw my water balloon, and sure enough, it goes inside the car and explodes like on their back windshield or something, and they slam on their brakes like right in the middle of the street. And we're in like junior high, okay, we got bikes, we're like, oh no. You know, so we're just frozen there. We're kind of waiting to see what happens. They start yelling at us from their car. We jump on our bikes, okay, and we take off. You know, we're pedaling, you know, super fast. We're pedaling. This car ramps the curb and starts coming out after us. Like they're driving through this parking lot. We start weaving through these apartments, like going over like all of these medians and stuff like that. They're jumping the medians like in their car, like chasing after us. And this lady's hanging out the window, like yelling all kinds of obscenities at us, like saying, we're gonna get you, we're gonna run you over. And we're like, oh my gosh. So we're pedaling as fast as we can go. We go down this one street, and we're all in like middle school, okay? And so we're going down this street, and there's this car coming, but they're coming up close behind us, like literally in a car about to run us over. And we turn left right in front of another car that's coming, like right in front of them. And the car keeps going. And we go into the shopping center, and we kind of hide out in these stores, okay? So we're in there for a little while, and we don't see them or anything, so we're like, okay, we're good to go. Like, okay, we're gonna go back home. I mean, I was in the store in this bathroom, like literally like shaking, like panicking, like about to throw up because of what just happened, okay? So we get on our bikes and we said, okay, we're gonna go back home, but we're not gonna go on these main streets. Like we're gonna go kind of these back ways, like through this apartment complex to get back to our house. So sure enough, we start riding through this apartment complex. We come to a dead end in the apartment complex, and we turn around. And there's the cops with these ladies. And they get out. One of my friends on his bike takes off. Listen, I've never been caught by the police doing anything, okay, up to this point, all right? I'm panicked, okay? Like I'm frozen. Like I see these cops, and I'm like, I don't know what to do. So I just stand, like he takes off. I'm like, I'm not running from the cops on my bike. Like you're crazy, dude. And so these ladies are with them. They get out of the cop car. They're yelling at us and screaming at us, saying, you know, the lady's yelling at me, saying her arm's hurt and all this kind of stuff, and she's gonna sue us and all this. It's crazy, okay? So the cop, though, he arrests me and my cousin and puts us in the car. Well, as he's putting me like into his car, I did throw up everywhere. Like that's how nervous I was. Like I was so scared. Like the cops yelling at me too. Well, don't throw up in my car. Like open the door, throw up outside, you know. So I'm literally throwing up like outside his door because I know what I'm about to face. He didn't take me, I wish he would have taken me to the police department, okay? He took me home. I didn't want to go home, okay? Because I knew what was waiting for me when I got home. So sure enough, we pull up to the house. I mean, we hadn't even gotten out of the car yet. And my mom sees me sitting in the back of this police car and comes running out of the house. I mean, my mom can be really dramatic, but she comes running out of the house. She's crying. She falls on her knees and she's like, no, Clayton, what have you done? You know, and the cops get me out of the car and I'm just like, oh my gosh. Okay. Check this out though. They pressed charges against us for assault with a weapon. I'm not joking, like I'm not lying. Like the police report said, assault with a weapon. We had to get a lawyer. Like I had to go and like give my like a statement and all this, a deposition and all this kind of stuff. And it turns out, I guess the DA like got this, you know, this case and is like, assault with like a water balloon. Like I just could imagine like his face like laughing at this and like, you know, no. So nothing ever happened with it, but I did get in a lot of trouble with my parents. Like me and my cousin and one of these other guys, like my grandfather owned this house that he rented out. It was in terrible condition. We had to scrape the entire outside of this house and completely repaint it. I was grounded for months. I got in a bunch of trouble, okay, with this group of guys, all right? I was in a lot of trouble, like on a regular basis, okay? But I was really cool at school because I had gotten arrested and that was cool, I guess. But you know, there's a guy in the Bible. His name is Judas. Some of you may have heard of him before. He starts running with a wrong crowd and it gets him in some trouble. And so I want to show you what I'm talking about tonight. So if you got a Bible, you can turn to Matthew chapter 26. In this series, we're going to be looking at the life of Judas. You might be thinking, why are we looking at Judas? Like, isn't that the guy that betrayed Jesus? Like, what do we have to learn from him? A lot. There's a lot to learn from the life of Judas. And so over the next few weeks, we're going to just look at this guy. We're going to look at some of the heart issues behind what led to Judas doing what he did. And in case you're like, who is Judas? Judas is infamous for being the one that betrayed Jesus into the hands of the authorities, which led to him being on trial and being sentenced to death by crucifixion. Judas is the one who betrayed him. He was a follower of Jesus. He was one of the 12, one of these 12 followers, the disciples that were following Jesus. But one of the things you're going to see in Judas, just in some of the heart issues, kind of behind the issues, like kind of what's going on behind the scenes, you might find, I think we might find that we've got more in common than Judas than you might have previously thought. So we're going to look at some lessons from the life of Judas over the next few weeks. So got a Bible, Matthew chapter 26. We're going to start in verse 14. I'm going to have it here on the screen for you as well. Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12 disciples. Again, every time it talks about Judas, it's interesting in the Bible. When you read through the Bible, every time it references Judas, it almost will always say Judas, one of the 12. It's interesting, and I'll tell you why here in a second. But one of the 12 disciples went to the leading priests and asked, how much will you pay me to betray Jesus to you? And they gave him 30 pieces of silver. From that time on, Judas began looking for an opportunity to betray Jesus. So Judas is one of the 12. He's one of these followers of Jesus. And these followers, these disciples, the 12, they left everything to follow Jesus. And they walked with Jesus and they lived with Jesus for 3 years while Jesus had his ministry time on earth, while Jesus was going around healing people and preaching the good news. So here's what you got to understand about Judas first and foremost is that Judas had left everything to follow Jesus. He was a disciple. He was one of the 12. He heard everything that Jesus had to say. Like not a pastor talking about or referencing things that Jesus said. He was with the Son of God for 3 years, hearing exactly what God in the flesh had to say. He heard the gospel day in and day out. He saw the gospel lived out in front of him in Jesus day in and day out for 3 years. You need to remember that in Judas's 3 years with Jesus, he saw Jesus perform all kinds of miracles, like raising people from the dead, restoring people's sight. People who were blind, he helped them to see. People who couldn't hear, he enabled them to hear. He was casting out demons. He was feeding like 5,000 people, thousands of people with like 3 fish and like 2 loaves of bread. Like Judas saw these miracles. He saw all of it firsthand. He didn't have his parents telling him. He didn't have a pastor telling him about what Jesus did. Judas experienced it. He saw it with his own 2 eyes. Can you imagine? Like being one of the 12, seeing all of that, doing life, like living with these 11 other guys rather, and Jesus, like living with them, doing life with them for 3 years. They talked together, ate together, hung out together, did ministry together. Jesus taught them and trained them. Judas was one of the 12. And somehow, something began to happen in Judas. We'll see next week, kind of early on in this time with Jesus, something began to happen in Judas that ended up leading to him deserting this crew that he ran with for 3 years and stabbing Jesus in the back. But to understand the full weight of that, you've got to understand first and foremost that Judas was one of the 12. He was a disciple. He left everything to follow Jesus. They were tight, like they had a tight bond, a tight relationship with this community of guys that were in the trenches together. Have you ever spoken with someone who's spent any time in the war, whether it's your parents or grandparents? You know some of the closest people in their lives are the people they were in battle with. Have you ever seen the movie or the series, the Band of Brothers? Those guys will say that when they came back, and even for years after they came back from the war, they were closer with the guys that they were in battle with than they were even their own wives. And they weren't talking about it like it was a good thing. They were just stating the fact, like they were in the trenches with these guys. They were close with them. They formed a tight bond. Listen, Judas was one of those guys. Well, a lot of times we just write him off as the one who was betraying Jesus. But no, Judas was one of the 12. He was in the trenches, man. He had a relationship with these guys. And something was brewing inside of him, in his heart, that led to him deserting them, turning his back on them, and stabbing Jesus in the back. Let's keep going. Verse 47, and even as Jesus said this, Judas, so we skipped ahead, we've skipped some verses down into verse 47. Judas, again, look what it says, one of the 12. It's almost like here in Matthew's saying, can you believe this guy? Like again, Judas, one of the 12, right? I mean, let's remember that. Like, can you really believe this guy? Like, so Judas, one of the 12, arrives with a crowd. So he's not previously there, like he wasn't there with Jesus and the other 11. He's arriving with another crowd of men armed with swords and clubs. They had been sent by the leading priests and elders of the people. The traitor, Judas, had given them a prearranged signal. You will know which one to arrest when I greet him with a kiss. So Judas came straight to Jesus. Greetings, Rabbi, he exclaimed, and gave him the kiss. So Judas, again, one of the 12, arrives with this crowd. He wasn't there with the other 11 and with Jesus. He had left them. He had gone and made his own plans to benefit himself, to make some money, maybe to gain some power or relationships with these leading priests. So he shows up with them. And you know the disciples, now Jesus wasn't caught off guard by this because Jesus knew what Judas was going to do all along. But you know the other 11 had to be caught off guard, like, Judas, what are you doing with them? Right? Can you imagine being one of the other, like, Judas, you're supposed to be with us. You were doing life with us. You sacrificed with us. You left everything with us. Like, what are you doing with them? And then Judas walks forward and gives him a kiss, and then Jesus is arrested. Fast forward a couple scenes, Jesus is tried and sentenced to death by crucifixion. You see, Judas made a fatal, literally fatal, deadly mistake. And I want you to see what it was tonight, because I think a lot of times we are making that same mistake and we may not even realize it. So the first thing I want you to see about Judas is that I am Judas, we are Judas, when I walk away from Christian community. I would write that down and remember it. I'm Judas when I walk away from Christian community. That's what Judas did, right? He walked away from his crew, the guys that he had spent all of those years with, serving with Jesus. He walked away from them. He turned his back on them. And he began to have dealings with this crowd. You see, when we walk away from Christian community, it is a dangerous thing. It's dangerous. And we see that in the life of Judas. When Judas walked away from that Christian community that he had, from those followers of Jesus, from those companions that he had, when he turned his back on them, when he walked away from them and got in bed with the crowd, it led to destruction in his life. It led to pain. It led to regret. The same is true for us. When we turn away, when we walk away, or when we by default aren't involved or aren't engaged in Christian community, like intentional community where we're growing spiritually with other followers of Jesus, when we choose not to engage in that or we walk away from it, we're doing what Judas did. And I want you to know tonight, that's dangerous. It's destructive. It's going to lead to pain. It's going to lead to regret. Learn from Judas tonight that when you walk away from intentional Christian community, it's going to bring pain and regret and destruction in your life. It happened to Judas. And when I walk away from it, I'm just like him. I'm just like the betrayer. You might think like I did, like, well, why would Judas do that? Like, why would he turn his back on them and turn his back on Jesus? And we're going to talk some more about that next week, so you want to come back for part 2. But I think one of the reasons why Judas turned his back on the disciples, he turned his back on Jesus, was because, let's just be honest, man, it was probably hard doing life with Jesus. Like, when Jesus spoke to the disciples, he didn't tell them what they wanted to hear all the time. He told them what they needed to hear, right? He was speaking truth to them, and sometimes truth hurts. So Jesus is challenging him to live for eternal things, like things that matter in eternity. Jesus is challenging to deny himself and take up his cross and follow him. Jesus is challenging the disciples with, hey, whoever wants to save his life is going to lose it for my sake. Whoever's not willing to give up everything he has and come be my disciple isn't worthy to follow me. Jesus is telling them things like that. You think that stuff's easy to hear? I mean, that challenges us straight to our self-centered core. It's all about me. And Jesus is saying, no, it's not about you. You know, that had to be hard to hear. Especially when you've got this crowd telling you what you want to hear. Hey, we've got money. We've got power. We've got fame for you, Judas. You come follow us. You come hang out with us. And you'll get what you've always wanted. You see, Jesus was challenging to live for what mattered. For eternal, heavenly things. The crowd, on the other hand, was tempting Judas to live for earthly things, temporary things. And I'm sure you could imagine, because I'm sure you've been there just like I have been, that was really tempting to Judas, to live for the earthly, temporary things. See, when you put it like that, Judas starts to make a little bit more sense because we've all been there. We've all traded Jesus at one point in time or another for something that was cheap and worthless. We've all been there. I know I have. So I think it was hard for Judas to be around Jesus and these other 11. It was hard to make the decision to continue to follow this guy who's telling me to deny myself and follow him. Because the question always would come back to, in his heart, and I'm sure probably in yours and mine, well, what's in it for me? It's easy to understand a little bit more about Judas, where he's coming from, when you see the pull of the crowd versus the disciples. Let me ask you a question. Is the crew that you're running with, that you hang with, that you're doing life with, are they challenging you to live for eternal, heavenly things? Or are they tempting you to live for temporary, earthly things? Because see, I promise, the crowd that you're hanging with is going to determine your future. Check out this is what Proverbs has to say. Proverbs 13 verse 20 says this, walk with the wise and become wise. Associate with fools and get in trouble. Judas turned his back on that wise Christian community, and he began to associate with fools, with this crowd. And it got him in trouble. It got him in a lot of trouble. And so here's what I want you to see tonight, is that your friends determine your future. Your friends determine your future. You show me your friends, and I'll show you your future. You see, because we are always becoming like whoever we're hanging out with. And really, to put it simply, hanging equals becoming. Hanging equals becoming. And I want to prove it to you. Here's an example, okay? Here is our drummer, Spencer, all right? Okay? You can see him jamming out right here, drums with us every week here at Raider Church. Here he is. Hopefully you can kind of see his man bun in the back right here, okay? Awesome, rocking the long hair, rocking the man bun. Now, if you're like me, you might be wondering, okay, where did Spencer get the idea to rock like the long hair with the man bun? Like, where did that come from? Let me think. How about right here? This would be Mark, our worship leader. Here he is with his long flowing hair. Here he is right here leading worship with his hat on backwards because he's cool, with his hair tied in a man bun. So see, I'm proving it to you right now. Who you hang with is who you're going to become, okay? Because hanging equals becoming. Hanging equals becoming. You show me your friends, I'll show you your future. Now, Judas, after he realizes Jesus has been sentenced to death on the cross, Judas is broken. He realizes he made this terrible mistake. But he also knows it's too late. Jesus has been sentenced to death, and they're taking him away. And so Judas goes to the leading priest and he says, here's your money back. I made a terrible mistake. And they throw it back at him and they say, hey, what's it to us? That's your fault. That's the decision you made. That's blood money. We don't want it. It's yours. And so Judas, in his shame and regret, goes and makes a noose for himself and hangs himself. And tradition says that whether it was the rope or the branch or whatever, it broke and he fell off this tree that was hanging over a cliff that he had hung himself on, and his body burst open as he hit the rocks. You see, Judas's mistake to walk away from intentional Christian community cost him his life. It brought death and destruction and pain. But in that moment, instead of repenting and turning from his sin, Judas ran. Instead of making the wise decision in that moment when he realized that Jesus had been sentenced to death, instead of trying to come back to this crew that he had left, instead of repenting, turning from his sin, Judas ran. Because he thought it was too late for him. Can I just tell you tonight, it's not too late for you. If you've been rejecting that intentional Christian community, even maybe you've walked away from it, and you're coming back to Raider Church because there's been something here that's interested you, or you thought, man, that's a place I could go. That's a place maybe I could go and get involved and get plugged in. Or maybe some of you are here tonight and you've just never gone all in with a church. Like being involved in a small group, getting involved with a group of friends that are intentionally trying to follow Jesus and challenge you to grow spiritually and follow Jesus. But whatever camp you're in tonight, here's my challenge for you, is that many of you need to change your playgrounds and your playmates. You need to change your playgrounds and your playmates. And here's what I mean by that. You need to change the places you go, and you need to change the places or the people that you go with. You need to change the places that you're going, and you need to change the people that you're going to those places with. You need to change your playgrounds and your playmates. You see, you need some companions. You need the 11 that you can walk with and do life with and grow spiritually with. Every single one of us need that. You know, Jesus, he was a friend of sinners. He was friends with the crowd. In fact, Jesus was pumped about the crowd who would come and see and listen. He was friends with them. He was nice to them. He ministered to them. But his companions, the ones he did life with, were the 11. Do you have that? Do you have that in your life? Because if you don't, then you need to change your playgrounds and your playmates. Otherwise, you may experience some of the pain, some of the destruction, some of the regret that Judas did. You know, my brother Travis, if you were here last semester, he got to share with us for a little bit just about his life and story. And my brother Travis went to Tech here, and his time in high school, his time here at Tech, he would tell you it was a blur. It was a total waste of time. He was drunk half the time. He was an alcoholic. He was doing drugs. He did every drug you can possibly imagine. Sleeping around, just doing all kinds of craziness. And he always heard me kind of challenging him, hey man, come and join us, man. Forget all that stuff. It's a waste of your time. It's just going to bring you pain and regret. And every once in a while, God would begin to speak to him and be like, I want that. And he would begin to try to follow Jesus, and he would show up somewhere. He would come to something and feel like God was speaking to him, but then he would go right back into his old lifestyle. As he continued to follow Jesus, he got more and more involved in our church. I got to baptize him. Not too long after that, he moved to Dallas, got a great job there. And I continued to stay on him. He would call me or text me about the struggles he was having, about when he got drunk this time or that time, or he was continuing to tell me and be real with me about where he was at, and that he wanted to follow Jesus, but he just kept struggling, kept falling, he kept messing up. And at the same time, he was going to this ministry called The Porch in Dallas at a church called Watermark. And he was hearing the pastor there say, Travis, he'd go talk to him afterwards. Travis, you've got to come all in with this. Like, you've got 1 foot in and 1 foot out. You've got to come all in with us. And until you do, until you come all in, until you change your playgrounds and your playmates, you're going to continue to struggle. Travis continued to hear that. continue to run with the same crew. And so finally, one week, he met another guy, actually went to tech, was a beta just like he was going to the porch. And they connected and they were friends. They had known each other just by name. But they got involved in a small group. They went to this retreat, and then that led to another small group. And Travis went all in with both feet. And Travis said the real turning point in his consistency now in his walk with Jesus was when he went all in. When he quit turning away from Christian community and he got involved in a small group. He changed his playgrounds. He changed his playmates. He changed who he ran with and did life with. He was still friends with his old crew. But he had to stop going to a lot of the places they were going to. And he had to make some new friends. But if Travis were here right now, I know he would tell you that everything changed for him when he went all in. And he took that step to get connected with some other followers of Jesus. And everything changed for him. And listen, the same is true for you. If you will come all in with us, if you'll change your playgrounds, change your playmates, I believe you will begin to see a consistency in your walk with Jesus like you've never seen before. And so here's my challenge for you today, just real practical. Here in just a second, after our service, we've got an after party. You can go out and get destroyed by that thing that turns around. I'm sure I will too, okay? But we're gonna have some tables out there with some of our group leaders there. And I wanna challenge you, just go sign up for a group. The great thing about that is you can meet the leader tonight so that you know someone before you show up. Man, take a friend and go do it together. But get signed up for a group tonight. Maybe one of our groups doesn't work out for you. You and some of your friends, listen, we'll start a group for you. We'll give you what to do. We'll show you what to do. In fact, right after this, right after the service, we're gonna have a meeting. We got a meeting that we're gonna have in a room upstairs, and we'll tell you how to get there. But if you're here and you're just like, man, me and my friends, we would love to just start a new group. Like when we can meet, that's convenient for us, we'll start a new group for you. We'll tell you how to do that. But my challenge for you tonight is this, is to go all in with both feet and get connected, an intentional Christian community, and stop turning away from it for worthless, cheap substitutions. You know, one of the most amazing things about the life of Judas that is so interesting to me is that Jesus knew what Judas was going to do, and yet he kept him close anyways. Right? Isn't that so strange? That Jesus knew what Judas was going to do, that he knew that Judas was going to betray him, yet he kept him close anyways. It's almost like in spite of the sin that was in his life then and the sin that Jesus knew he was going to commit in the future, Jesus wanted him near to him. And one of the most stunning scenes to me in the Bible is Jesus gathered with his 12 at the Last Supper. And he passes around this bread, he passes around this cup, and he says, this is my body that's broken for you. This represents my blood that's gonna be shed for you. And Judas was there taking it. It's almost like, to me, if I'm putting myself in Jesus's like mind and what he was thinking, it was almost like this last effort. Judas, I'm going to die for you on the cross. My body's going to be broken for you. My blood's gonna be shed for you. I love you. In spite of what you've done, in spite of what you're about to do, I love you. Listen, I want every one of you here to know that tonight. In spite of what you've done, in spite of what you're going to do, Jesus died on the cross for you because he loves you. And some of you here tonight, you've never committed your life to Jesus. I want you to know that tonight is your night. That Jesus wants a relationship with you, whether you ever wanted it with him or not. He wants a relationship with you. And he died for you to prove it to you. His body was broken, his blood was shed. So that just by you putting your faith in Jesus, all of your sin, past, present, and future, can be forgiven. How amazing is that? What great news is that? In spite of what I've done, and in spite of what I'm going to do, Jesus wants a relationship with me. If that's you and you want to begin that relationship with Jesus tonight, I want to challenge you to stop by our Next Step Center after the service. Grab a Bible, let us pray with you. Let us point you in the right direction from here. And go online and just fill out that connection card, and it says, I want to commit my life to Jesus at raiderchurch.com. Fill that out. Let us know. We want to be in touch with you. God, thank you so much for every person that's here tonight. And God, we know, God, that Judas made a fatal mistake. And I pray, God, that none of us in here would make that same mistake. That we would choose the Christian community and not the crowd. We would choose to live for things that matter, not for things that are temporary and don't matter. God, help us to not be like Judas, who chose worthless and cheap substitutions for Jesus. And God, help us to remember that our friends, our crew, are going to determine the kind of future that we have. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thanks for checking out one of our messages today. For more information about our church or to watch other messages, you can go to our website at experiencelife.now.com. Let us know if we can serve you in any way, and we hope to see you real soon.